All right, let's dive into compassion today. And we're going deep, right? Not just the surface stuff.
Deeper.
Yeah. So we're going to be looking at a definition from Thupten Jinpa.
Okay.
He's a Tibetan scholar, works with the Dalai Lama.
Oh, wow.
And his take on this is really interesting.
I'm intrigued. What's so different about his definition?
Well, before we got into all this material you sent over, honestly, I thought empathy and compassion were basically the same thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get those two mixed up.
Right.
Compassion, though, it's really about more than just feeling sorry for someone.
Yeah.
It goes way beyond that.
So how does Jinpa define it then? What makes it different?
Well, he breaks compassion down into 3 core components.
Okay.
Cognitive, affective, and motivational.
That sounds pretty academic.
Well, they do, but trust me, they make sense when you break them down.
Okay, well, let's break them down then.
All right. Well, first, let's think about empathy for a second.
Okay.
It's that ability to step into someone else's shoes.
Yeah, to feel what they're feeling.
Exactly. And that's important, no doubt. But it's not the whole picture when it comes to compassion.
Gotcha. So, if a coworker's super stressed because they're drowning in work, and I think, wow, that must feel awful, that's empathy.
Right. You're recognizing their struggle. You're connecting with their emotional state.
But what makes it compassion then?
Compassion takes it a step further. It adds this element of wanting to help alleviate that suffering.
So it's not just about feeling their pain, it's about being moved to do something about it.
Exactly. So maybe you offer to help with a task or encourage them to take a break. It's that bridge between feeling and doing.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, so let's go back to those 3 components Jinpa talks about, starting with the cognitive one.
Right. So the cognitive component is really all about understanding.
Understanding what?
It's that I see you, I get where you're coming from, part of compassion.
Okay, so putting in the effort to really see their point of view.
Exactly. You're actively trying to grasp their situation.
Even if I haven't gone through something similar myself.
Right. You don't have to have had the exact same experience to understand where they're coming from. It's about recognizing their perspective as valid.
That's interesting.
It is. And it can be so powerful, especially in a workplace setting. Think about it.
Okay.
Imagine a new employee who needs time off for a family emergency.
Right.
A truly compassionate response, it goes way beyond just checking the company handbook.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It's about understanding their specific situation.
Yeah.
And how this loss is going to impact them.
Not just being well, the policy says this is how much time off you get.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, I'm getting that. So what about the affective component?
Affective, now that one's closely tied to empathy.
Okay, so this is where we actually get to feeling those emotions.
Yes. It's that I feel for you part of compassion.
So I'm not just intellectually understanding what they're going through, but actually tapping into their feelings.
Exactly. You're allowing yourself to experience that shared sense of humanity with them.
When I see someone going through a tough time, and I actually feel that pang of sadness with them.
Yes, exactly. But there's a caveat here, especially for those in leadership positions.
Okay.
One of the articles you sent, it talked about how leaders, they need to be empathetic.
Sure.
But they can't get so overwhelmed by their own emotions or their team's emotions that they become ineffective.
Right, because if you're drowning in your own feelings, you're not going to be able to help anyone else.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
Okay, I see that. So let's move on to that final piece then.
Right.
The motivational component.
So this is where compassion really takes action.
Okay. Give me an example of what that looks like.
Well, it's that I want to help you, part of compassion. So going back to that stressed out coworker, the motivational component is what would actually make you offer to lend a hand.
Okay, so it goes beyond just thinking, that's rough, or even feeling bad for them. It actually pushes me to do something.
Exactly. Maybe you offer to help with a specific task, or just lend a listening ear. The point is, you're motivated by this genuine desire to help ease their burden.
Okay, so we've got these 3 components working together. First, I understand their perspective right. Then I connect with their emotions. And that motivates me to actually take action.
That's a great summary. It's a really powerful process, and it can have a huge impact.
I bet. But I have to ask, how do you measure something as complex as compassion?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's something researchers, organizations, everybody is still figuring out.
Yeah, I can imagine. You can't exactly put compassion on a spreadsheet.
Right. It's not as simple as measuring sales figures or something. It's this mix of emotions and behaviors and even organizational culture.
So where do you even begin? Do you just ask people, hey, how compassionate are you feeling today?
No, not quite, but there are some approaches you can take. Like, one way is through surveys and questionnaires, asking employees how compassionate they perceive the workplace to be.
Interesting. So asking things like whether people feel supported or valued at work.
Exactly. You can also look at how teams interact, observe them.
Okay.
Like, how do they handle challenges? How do they resolve conflicts? How do they give and receive feedback?
Right, because those everyday interactions can tell you a lot about whether a workplace is truly compassionate or not.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of those exit interviews either.
Oh, that's a good point. What people say on their way out can reveal a lot about the real culture of a workplace.
Absolutely. It's a chance to see what was really going on beneath the surface.
Okay, so those are a few ways to assess compassion. But are there any actual metrics you can track beyond surveys and observations?
Well, one interesting thing to look at is company data, like employee turnover rates, absenteeism, things like that.
Wait, really? What do those have to do with compassion?
Think about it. When people feel unsupported and undervalued, they get burnt out, they get stressed, they disengage, and what happens then? They're more likely to quit their jobs or call in sick.
Ah, so those metrics can actually be an indicator of how compassionate a workplace is.
Exactly. If you see spikes in turnover or absenteeism, it might be a sign that something's not right, that maybe there's a lack of compassion going on.
That's fascinating. So even though we can't measure compassion directly, we can look at these other indicators to get a sense of how it's playing out in a workplace.
Exactly. And it's important to do so because compassion has a real impact. Some research has shown that compassionate workplaces actually have lower turnover and absenteeism rates and higher job satisfaction overall.
Wow, that's pretty compelling. So it's not just a nice to have, it actually makes good business sense.
Absolutely. But it's not just about the bottom line. Compassionate workplaces are just more humane, more enjoyable places to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. People want to feel valued and respected.
Exactly. It builds stronger bonds, reduces stress, creates a more positive and supportive environment for everyone.
So it really is a win-win. Okay, this has been so interesting. I feel like I'm starting to see compassion in a whole new light.
I'm glad to hear that. It's a fascinating topic. And speaking of different perspectives, before we wrap up, there's one question I'm really curious to get your take on.
Okay, what is it?
Should leaders always put compassion first, like above empathy? Or is it about finding the right balance between the two?
That's a really good question. And one we're definitely going to need to explore further.
Absolutely. So stay tuned because we'll be tackling that very question when we come back.
Yeah.
So before we dive into that whole compassion versus empathy thing for leaders,
Right.
let's look at what compassionate leadership actually looks like, in practice.
Yeah, let's get practical. Because one of the articles you sent my way, it mentioned that even small actions can make a big difference when it comes to showing compassion at work.
Oh, absolutely. Like something as simple as remembering and using a colleague's name.
Oh, yeah.
That can go so far in making them feel seen.
Really, just using their name.
It sounds so basic, right?
Yeah.
But it shows you see them as an individual, not just like another face in the crowd.
Oh, it's just a number.
Exactly. And that goes back to that cognitive component we were talking about before.
Right, taking that extra step to really understand where someone's coming from.
Exactly. Recognizing that they have a whole life outside of work, too.
Yeah.
With their own experiences and challenges.
Okay.
And that actually leads into another practical tip.
Okay.
Offering help to a coworker who might be struggling.
Oh, I love that one. I mean, it seems so simple,
Right.
but I bet it can make a world of difference to the person who's struggling.
It really can. And it's such a great example of that motivational component in action,
Yeah.
You see someone who's struggling.
Yeah.
You feel that little pang of concern. And then it motivates you to offer support.
So whether I'm helping with a task or sharing my expertise or just being a listening ear, all those things can show compassion.
All of those things, absolutely. Any gesture that shows you care, one article I read, it said that if a coworker experiences a loss, someone from the company should reach out to them within 48 hours.
Wow. To offer support.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting policy.
Yeah, that's powerful. It really shows they care.
Right. It says a lot about the company's values. And it doesn't always have to be about these major life events either.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes just noticing a change in someone's mood or behavior, checking in with them, just asking, hey, are you doing okay?
That can be huge.
It can make a huge difference. Just showing that you're paying attention, that you care.
That you're there for them.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. Now, what about giving praise? I feel like everyone loves a compliment.
Oh, absolutely. And praising employees publicly.
Yeah.
It's another great way to show compassion.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, not only does it boost morale for the person you're recognizing, right?
Right.
But it also, it sets a positive tone for the whole team.
So it's about creating this culture of appreciation.
Exactly. And that makes people actually want to come to work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And, all of this kind of leads into the bigger picture of, compassionate leadership in general, which, several of the articles you sent, they touched on that.
Yeah, compassionate leadership. I feel like that's such a buzzword these days.
It is. But it's more than just a buzzword,
Yeah.
It's a real thing.
And it makes me think about something we were discussing earlier, too.
Okay.
One of the sources you shared, it mentioned this Harvard Business Review assessment to help leaders figure out their own level of compassion. It made me wonder, how do you actually measure compassion? Is that even possible?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's something that everyone is still trying to figure out. Researchers, organizations.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's not like measuring, sales targets or something.
Right. It's not that simple. Compassion, it's this complex thing. It involves emotions and behaviors, even the overall culture of an organization.
So how do you even start to measure something like that?
Well, one approach is to use those employee surveys we were talking about before.
Oh, right, those questionnaires.
Yeah. You can ask employees how compassionate they perceive the workplace to be.
So ask them things like, do you feel supported at work? Do you feel valued? Things like that.
Exactly. You're getting right to the heart of it.
Okay, what else?
You can also use what we call observational metrics.
Observational metrics.
Basically, you observe how people interact in their day-to-day work.
Okay, I'm listening.
For example, how do teams respond to challenges? How do they handle conflict?
How they give feedback to each other.
Yes, all of that. Because those everyday interactions can tell you a lot about whether a workplace is truly compassionate or not.
Right. It's about looking for those little signs.
Yeah.
Seeing if people genuinely care about each other.
Exactly. And don't forget those exit interviews either.
Oh, right. We talked about those before.
Yeah, those can be so valuable because the feedback you get from people who are leaving, it can give you a really honest look at the culture of a workplace.
It's like a chance to see what was really going on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got surveys, observations, exit interviews. Are there any other ways to assess compassion? Like any actual metrics we can track?
You know what's really interesting?
What?
You can actually look at things like employee turnover rates and absenteeism rates.
Wait, really? What do those have to do with compassion?
Well, think about it. What often leads to high turnover?
I don't know. People finding better jobs.
That's definitely part of it. But a lot of times, it's because people are burning out.
Oh.
They're stressed, they feel unsupported and undervalued. And when that happens, they're more likely to either quit or call in sick a lot.
I see what you mean. So if a company has high turnover or absenteeism, it could be a sign that they need to work on their compassion game.
Exactly. It's like a red flag that something's not quite right in the culture.
That's fascinating. So even though we can't directly measure compassion,
Right.
we can look at these other factors to get a sense of whether it's present or not.
You got it. And it's so important to pay attention to this stuff.
Why?
Because compassion, it really does make a difference. Research has shown that companies with more compassionate workplaces,
Yeah.
they tend to have lower turnover,
Yeah.
lower absenteeism, and their employees are just happier overall.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, who wouldn't want to work in a place where they feel valued and supported?
Right. It's good for the employees, and it's good for the company's bottom line, too.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's about more than just profits.
Oh, absolutely.
Compassionate workplaces are just better places to be.
Yeah, I agree. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels good about coming to work each day.
Exactly. It's about building strong relationships, reducing stress, making it a more positive and supportive place for everyone.
Okay, this is all making a lot of sense now. But, before we move on, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on. Something you said earlier about how different cultures express compassion in different ways.
Oh, that's such an important point.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
So, while the basic idea of compassion,
Wanting to help someone who's suffering.
right, that's pretty universal. But the way people actually show compassion, that can vary a lot from culture to culture.
Oh, I can imagine. So, what are some examples of that?
Well, in some cultures, physical touch is a really common way to show compassion.
Like hugging someone who's upset.
Exactly. Or putting a hand on their shoulder. But in other cultures, that might be seen as intrusive or inappropriate.
That's interesting. So you have to be mindful of those cultural differences.
Absolutely, because what might be seen as a compassionate gesture in one culture could be totally misinterpreted in another. And it makes you realize how important it is to be really sensitive to those cultural nuances.
Yeah. So your intentions are understood.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, compassion is about connecting with another human being.
Yeah.
And that means meeting them where they are and understanding their perspective, even if it's different from your own.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Wow, this has been such an eye-opening conversation.
It has, hasn't it?
We've gone from defining compassion to talking about practical ways to show it at work, and even touched on the challenges of measuring it.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have, but remember that question I asked earlier?
About whether leaders should prioritize compassion over empathy.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, we still need to dig into that.
We do, so stay tuned because we're going to be tackling that and more in the final part of our deep dive. All right, welcome back to the show. We've been talking all about compassion, what it is, how it works, even how to spot it in the workplace.
Yeah, it's been a great discussion. We've broken down those three components Jinpa talked about, cognitive, affective, motivational, and we even touched on those cultural differences, how different cultures express compassion differently.
Right. And before the break, I asked a question that I think is super important for anyone in a leadership position or anyone who wants to be. Should leaders always put compassion first, even above empathy? Or is there a balance there?
That's a great question. And it's tricky too, because, on the one hand, empathy is so important for understanding what someone's going through.
Yeah, for connecting with them on an emotional level.
Right. But compassion, that's what fuels the action.
So both are important, but they serve different purposes. In different situations, one might be more important than the other.
Exactly. Think about it. Say a team member comes to you and they're really upset about something personal.
Okay.
In that moment, just being present with them, listening to them, validating their feelings.
That's empathy, right?
Right. And that might be the most important thing you can do in that moment. More important than jumping into problem-solving mode.
So sometimes just holding space for someone's emotions is actually the most compassionate thing you can do.
Absolutely. But a good leader, they'll take that empathy and use it as fuel for action.
Okay, I'm listening.
They'll think, okay, how can I use this understanding I have to help this person in a concrete way?
It's not just about feeling with someone, it's about feeling for them and then actually doing something to help.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, before we wrap up, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on. The idea of self-compassion.
Oh, that's so crucial.
Yeah, several of the articles you sent mention that, especially for leaders. Why is self-compassion so important?
Well, you know what they say, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah, I've heard that.
If you're constantly beating yourself up, being super critical of yourself, it's hard to be kind and understanding to other people.
So you're saying if I want to be more compassionate towards others, I need to start by being more compassionate towards myself.
Exactly. Think of self-compassion as the foundation for compassion towards others.
I like that.
When you're kind to yourself, when you treat yourself with understanding, you're actually replenishing your own emotional reserve.
So you have more to give to others.
Right. It's self-compassion creates this ripple effect. It starts with you, and then it spreads outward.
That's a cool way to think about it. And I bet that's especially important for leaders.
Oh, absolutely. Because when a leader models self-compassion, it sets the tone for the whole organization. It creates a culture where it's okay to be human.
To make mistakes. To not be perfect all the time.
Exactly. People feel safe to ask for help. They don't have to be afraid of being judged.
It creates that psychological safety we were talking about before, right?
Yes. And that's where the real magic happens. When people feel safe and supported, they're more engaged, more productive, more creative.
And probably more compassionate towards their colleagues, too.
Exactly. It's this amazing cycle. Compassion breeds more compassion.
I love that. Wow, this whole conversation has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of compassion now. And not just what it means, but how to actually bring more of it into my life, both at work and outside of work.
I'm so glad to hear that. That's what we were hoping for, to inspire people to cultivate more compassion.
Yeah, because it's more than just a feeling, right? It's a choice we make, a commitment to easing suffering and making the world a better place.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So what small act of compassion can you practice today at work, at home, out in the world? Keep that question in mind as you go about your day. And until next time, keep diving deep.